good to be back home in Dearborn, Michigan. So what brings a soldier back home to his hometown? There's several things. You come home to see family. And you relish every moment you spend with family. And today, my father and my sister are honoring me with their presence. You spend time with friends. Everybody in the Army, if you've ever served in the Army, knows that back home you have a best friend. And today, Dave LaRaza sits there as my best friend. He's been to more places that I've been than anybody else that I've been associated with back here. And heck, I had to talk him out of going to meet me in Desert Storm back then. But he's my best friend, and he's here with his entire family supporting me like they always have, unconditionally, for the past 32 years. You also come home to do great things for the community that raised you to be who you are. And so you get opportunities to do that. And someone that's been absolutely instrumental in my senior leadership in the Army and allowing me to engage this community and all the great veterans here is George Harvey. He has reached out to me on multiple occasions and gave me some great opportunities to come back home and enjoy the fellowship that I so dearly remember from high school. So George, thank you so much for what you do for this council, this community, and for me. Ladies and gentlemen, Congressman Dingell, Mayor O'Reilly, distinguished guests, America's veterans, thank you for being here today as we commemorate the 60th anniversary of the Korean War Armistice Agreement and pay homage to the veterans who served, fought, died, and are still missing from that conflict. It seems like every day I read about brave Americans who made the ultimate sacrifice in Korea, being identified and being brought home to be buried in the presence of their family and friends with the thanks of a grateful nation. Even though we're making progress in bringing our heroes home, we can't rest until every last one of them has been brought back. The honor to receive those honors befitting of those who gave the fullest measure for America and the very worthy cause of freedom. Before I go further, I want to let you know how proud I am to be surrounded by this fraternity of veterans, a fraternity that encompasses several generations of Americans united by a common oath that we all took at the very beginning to support and defend the Constitution of our United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. No matter where or how you served, I don't care what it was you did. You honor me with your presence today and the service to your nation, no matter how long ago that was. Although the percentages have changed over the years, you are all members of the 1% Club that offered to willingly take up arms in your nation's defense. I salute you and thank you and your families for that sacrifice. On 27 July 1953, the ceasefire took effect in Korea. After 3 years, 1 month, and 2 days of war, after more than 300,000 Americans deployed to the fight, after multiple acts of incredible courage, heroism, and sacrifice, the mortars finally stopped flying and the guns went silent. Over time, some have erroneously suggested that this war was somehow a stalemate. They say that the war was fought to a standstill, but let's look at the facts and why our government decided to get involved in this conflict for a moment or two. As you recall, World War II had just ended and was a very recent memory, not only for our soldiers, but also our civilian leadership. The United States was strong and growing into its role as the leader of the Western world. We were enjoying the benefits of peace and stability. Nonetheless, our democratic allies in Southeast Asia were looking at a new threat of uncertainty and aggression. Communists had won a victory in China, which was backed by the Soviet Union, and were spreading their influence throughout the region of Southeast Asia, Vietnam, and Korea. Our nascent ally, a country that we determined is crucial to stability and the freedom of that region, Japan, was becoming encircled by belligerent regimes which were enclosing it from all directions. In early 1950, North Korean forces invaded the South, and the Truman administration correctly determined that the world could not let this aggression go unchecked, especially considering the recent results of the recent experiment in appeasing a Hitler regime in the 1930s. U.S. leadership was needed in order to halt the spread of communism and uphold our security obligations to Japan. the United States could not turn a blind eye. Nonetheless, as members of this audience know all too well, the United States military was demobilizing and downsizing. From 45 to 47, it shrank in size from 12 million to 1 million. Our armed forces as an institution were woefully unprepared for the fight. Regardless, the combat veterans and new recruits were equipped with something that was unique to American soldiers and in abundance. That was determination, bravery, and grit. By the time significant U.S. forces and equipment entered the conflict, the Korean Peninsula was shrouded in red, with the exception of an area about 100 by 50 miles in the southeast corner of the Korean Peninsula, which came to be known as the Pusan Perimeter. Kim Il-sung's forces, backed by over 1 million Chinese soldiers, pushed past the 38th parallel to the southern tip of the peninsula in a matter of months, encountering almost no resistance. The Democratic Forces of Korea, their allies, controlled less than 10% of the country, and then entered the full combat power of our great military as they started their movement towards the beaches of Incheon. For the most part, American soldiers were traveling from half a world away. American soldiers and Marines were outmanned. Americans and their allies were initially outgunned and fighting in completely unfamiliar territory, where behind every mountain was another mountain. And by the way, they were doing it at the onset of winter. Lastly, the American military was fighting in the backyard of two very powerful communist regimes, China and the Soviet Union. Nonetheless, within 2 months' time, American soldiers, Marines, sailors, and airmen pushed the aggressors back to the partition line of the 38th parallel. The next 3 years served to solidify that line and remind communist forces in the region that America could not turn a blind eye to aggression and guarantee that freedom and prosperity had a strong foothold in Southeast Asia. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, some have called the Korean War a stalemate. That, my fellow Americans, is not a stalemate, it was a victory. It was a victory that was fought and earned by units that represented the combat veterans that I'm looking at in front of me and to my sides today. It was earned by the 7th Infantry Division in the Battle of Triangle Hill. It was earned by the 1st and 5th Marine Regiments along with our Navy and Air Force during the Incheon landing. It was earned by elements of the 21st Infantry Division, which stood resolutely defending the Pusan Perimeter, awaiting reinforcements from another part of the world. And it was earned by so many other members of the support elements of the Army and service members of other services, without whom we could not have done that mission. Because we took a determined stand, because our men and women fought and sacrificed, the people of South Korea have had 60 years of peace. 60 years to build a dynamic democracy and robust economy. Because thousands of brave men and women from 22 nations put their lives on the line, the face of Asia was changed dramatically for the better. Even in the face of daunting odds and numbers posed by the Chinese and North Korean armies, America held their ground, counterattacked effectively, underscored by countless acts of valor. It came at great cost. 44,000 Americans dead and missing in action. More than 103,000 people wounded. I'm reminded of a Corporal Tibor Rubin, who was assigned to my current unit, the 1st Cavalry Division, in Company I of the 8th Cavalry Regiment. He received the highest honor you can receive, the Medal of Honor, for his intrepid valor on a hilltop near Unsan, where he volunteered to man a machine gun to secure his unit's withdrawal in late October 1950. You see, the advanced Chinese eventually captured him, but not before Rubin mounted a ferocious defense that cost the enemy dearly. A Holocaust survivor from Hungary, who immigrated to the United States in 1948, Corporal Rubin spent more than 30 months in captivity, refusing to be repatriated by the communists to his former country, Hungary, behind the Iron Curtain. This great American, not by birth but by naturalized citizenship, put everything on the line for his adopted country and fellow soldiers. Thanks to Corporal Rubin and his peers, the lessons learned by soldiers in that conflict have aided subsequent generations of soldiers for 60 years. Lessons that books do not teach, like keep off the skyline, dig in deep, keep your socks dry, Keep your weapons clean. Hold your fire until you can see the enemy's eyes. Many of these lessons are still applicable in today's fight. Another important lesson that was learned is the Code of Conduct, which the Korean War veterans helped develop and was signed into law by President Eisenhower in 1955. This code reinforced the pride and purpose of all service members, including me. Code of Conduct number 1, I am an American fighting force which guards my country and my own way of life, and I am prepared to give my life in defense of my nation. Code of Conduct 2, I will never surrender of my own free will. I could go on, but the point is that these principles, which we as soldiers always need to maintain at the forefront of our minds. And this code improves the capability, effectiveness, and determination of soldiers even today. This code also provides the roots for the Soldier's Creed, which is fairly recent, and the Warrior Ethos. Both were authorized in 2003. I want to focus on the 7th line of the Creed, which states, I will never leave a fallen comrade. Your generation is the absolute embodiment of this statement. I don't have to remind you of this fact, but there's still over 8,000 American service members missing from the Korean War. Every time I speak to a Korean War veteran, they mention their efforts and account for those who are missing. Never leave a fallen comrade. Every day I drive by an American Legion or a VFW, I see the PFW flag. Never leave a fallen comrade. I know that those words will inspire many of you here today, which is why I want to share the story of Thomas Hudner and Jesse Brown. And I may have to pause when I tell the story, but it's an incredible one. Who both served on the USS Leyte during the war. Their tale is one of both courage and heartbreak, but ultimately one of sacrifice, honor, and duty. Captain retired Hudner was a Navy pilot and Naval Academy graduate who survived the war, continued to serve in a long and distinguished career, and currently lives in his home state of Massachusetts. Some of you may be familiar with Ensign Jesse Brown, for he was our first African-American pilot in the U.S. Navy. Despite daunting odds growing up in poverty as the son of a Mississippi sharecropper, Ensign Brown fulfilled his dream of graduating from college and flying airplanes in service of his nation at a time when diversity that we take for granted today just didn't exist. Upon his arrival to the Leyte as an eager but inexperienced pilot, Hudner met the more seasoned and skilled Brown, and the two forged a friendship based on mutual admiration and respect for professional ability. The two refused to let the colors of black and white come between their own dedication to navy blue, and the bond they formed in the crucible of combat proved unbreakable. While flying a close air support mission in support of the Marines who were stuck at Chosin Reservoir in December 1950, Brown's F-4 Corsair was hit by ground fire and went down into heavy snow, bitter and cold Korean mountains. In an attempt to rescue his fallen comrade, Lieutenant J.G. Hudner crashed his own aircraft and tried in vain to free Ensign Brown from the burning wreckage of his plane before the fast-approaching Chinese forces could reach him. Despite his many efforts, Hudner was unsuccessful, and with nightfall and the enemy forces approaching, he had to abandon his dying comrade, his injuries, and the cold. Ladies and gentlemen, that day's haunted him ever since. Even though he's received the Medal of Honor for valor for what he did. This is where my wife told me to pause for a second. Here's the amazing coda to this tragic story of two brothers from two completely different walks of life. Although Jesse Brown didn't leave the Korean mountaintop more than 62 years ago, at the age of 88, Hudner never forgot about his wingman. He arrived in North Korea last week